Hi guys, I hope you're well. Matt Rhodes here, and I want to talk today about this new organization opening up, Georgia versus the world. It's been a big talking point. I see a lot of emotional reaction to it. Some people saying it's great, more competition, more chances for athletes, and others saying it's a terrible thing which will divide the sport even more. So let's try and break this down without emotion and understand what's happening and what may happen. The big questions are, who's really running this thing? Who's behind it? Where's the finance coming from? What are the implications on the sport and other organizations? In particular, of course, the biggest league, East versus West. Looking at very interesting athlete reaction to this. And in terms of people working in the sport, everyone's been a little bit cagey in terms of what they said about it. But if we dig a little deeper, I think it's pretty clear what different people's opinions really are. So in terms of the league being formed, Georgia versus the world, I want to break it down into two parts. A few things that aren't a good look and make you question what this is really all about. And a few things that look perhaps positive and legitimate reasons why perhaps it's been started up and it could be a good thing for the sport. First of all, the name and logo, there's no getting away from the fact it looked like a copy of East versus West. That's quite a strange way to go about creating a new tournament, particularly if you don't want any problems with the biggest league in the world in your sport. But Georgia versus the world. But we've already seen that the super matches set up that don't involve Georgians. I've seen people comment on that, and I've seen the official account, Georgia versus the world, reply that our organization will be creating super matches between elite international athletes. It does not have to involve a Georgian. So already we understand that the name isn't actually representative of the plans that they have ahead. And then I think the second thing is the way in which it was created and when it was created. It was created at the time when East versus West was going through maximum turmoil. And by Genadi, who's defected from East versus West to create this new tournament, it looks more as if it was a rival as opposed to something to complement the standing East versus West biggest league in arm wrestling. But on balance, let's also look at some of the perhaps positives, perhaps legitimate, innocent reasons for creating this. One, Georgian athletes were banned by WAF. Of course, that's a major problem for them, for their athletes to pull. And this creates an opportunity for those athletes once more to get a chance to have matches. There's the location, Georgia, the popularity of the sport there. There's so many people interested in arm wrestling that compete. It makes sense to give more of those people an opportunity in a sport where it's very popular in their country. There's always the argument that more organizations, more tournaments is a good thing overall for the sport. A free market leads to higher standards across the board. It motivates all tournaments to improve their standards, including the biggest one, East versus West. And in terms of the athletes, it gives them a chance to have experience, matches, and earn some money and raise their public profile. So these are all potential positives of having extra organizations. And of course, lastly on this point, during Engin's regime, he crushed any other organization trying to start up in any way. And overall, I would say the general consensus of fans was that was not a good thing and not fair at all. So now that it's happening once more here, it's still the consensus that overall we should allow a free market and give these guys an opportunity. Now, another very interesting thing is to look at the reaction to this of the most important or most relevant parties. East versus West owners, potentially Engin, and the athletes themselves. Now, the East versus West owners have said Georgia versus World athletes who are not under contract with East versus West at the moment are given a one-time opportunity to do both. One time. So that suggests they're going to give the guys a pass that are competing there now, but that they won't in future. They also said some of the athletes who are competing at Georgia versus the World will be offered contracts afterwards. And therefore, of course, that means that those athletes won't be allowed to compete at Georgia versus the World after this first event. They also strongly implied that any athletes who were offered a match at East versus West and declined it, but are now pulling at Georgia versus the World, would not be welcome in future. So a kind of turf war looks like it's already opening up. The new owners also talked about parameters, lines that can't be crossed, and otherwise the athletes can do anything they want. So therefore it's clear that the new owners of East versus West don't want athletes to have that type of freedom, and that they applied it in particular to Zawa and Genadi, two very well-known super heavyweight athletes that it appears, have no chance now of competing at East versus West anytime soon. Okay, it's only 2 athletes, but this already does present a challenge. Genadi, I believe, is ranked number 7 at the moment in the world at East versus West rankings. So no matter which way you cut this, it is a loss. Then we look at Engin Terzi. Is he involved in this whatsoever? I have no information that he is. He's denied it himself. What was telling is, he was asked about this on a live, and his answer was, Genadi is a great athlete and a great person, more than capable of running his own tournament. Well, can you imagine Engin's reaction when he was the owner of East versus West? He would never have allowed this. Of course, he was all for the sport, only for the good of the sport, and that meant that no one else could set up a threatening rivalry organisation. But now he's not an owner of East versus West. That's no problem whatsoever. The other interesting thing connected to Engin, he had a guy called Roman working with him closely for years. When the Georgia versus the World have made all of their posts on Instagram for match announcements, one person has been tagged in them that's not the athlete, and that is Roman. So clearly he is working now with Georgia versus the World. Has Engin's got any connection with Roman and Georgia versus the World? We don't know. But there's things happening there with these connections that certainly raise questions. And the final interesting factor is when Georgia versus the World have made match announcements on their social media, what's the reaction been like? We've seen quite a number of popular athletes that compete at East versus West liking their posts. Even I've seen East versus West themselves liking one of the match posts. So are these tactics of people trying at the moment to keep friendly with everyone while they still see how the dust settles and all this? Because it's clear that right now nothing is absolutely certain. So how serious is Georgia versus the World? Well, of course, we don't know yet, and they themselves won't know until they begin having these tournaments. How is the funding? Are they relying on a pay-per-view model, or do they have big financial backers, sponsors? It's perfectly possible that they do in Georgia because of the profile of arm wrestling of people like Devon Larratt. Or it's possible, such as Engin had at East versus West, you have a big financial backer that could do so for a number of reasons, tax deductions, many reasons. And therefore, if they don't have to rely on a pay-per-view model, they have a much bigger chance of success. And therefore, if this thing does work, which other athletes might they come in for? And of course, everyone has got in the back of their mind, they have got the guy at the top of the tree there in their country, Devon Larratt. I think that's a long way off yet, but you never know. That's where the kind of danger sits, I think, for everybody. Will it grow big enough and popular enough and enough money there to bring him into their organisation? But on the flip side, is this an organisation that can give potential top contenders an opportunity? We can see if they're good enough, and if they are, East versus West can bring them into their organisation. Well, that might be so, and a lot of that will depend on if Georgia versus the World go down a contract route, non-competing route. Genadi, I think, has been quite outspoken that he was always against contracts, so perhaps he's not looking to do that at all. But once you go into business and it's your own money and your own reputation on the line, things can change pretty quickly. So that's something else we've just got to see what happens down the line. The fact is, there's already been a lot of matches announced, maybe more. And we know that athletes that are coming have had their accommodation and travel already paid for. We don't know about prize money, but there's enough money there to suggest that from somewhere, there's backing for this tournament before any pay-per-view sales have even been open to the public. Contracts, we've seen at East versus West that whilst athletes are under contract, that hasn't guaranteed the fact that all the athletes are going to stay there and there'll be no problems. We've seen this big boycott. There's also the realistic fact that in some countries, for example, Russia, where I am now, if an athlete wanted to break contract and join an organisation here, there's nothing that anyone can do outside of Russia in terms of trying to sue that person. Trust me, it can't happen whatsoever. We now here in Russia have Armatura. It's growing and growing. In 2 weeks' time, they have their first live stadium competition. They've got guests Morozov, Dadakan, Siplenkov, Laletin. I know the people that own this tournament. It's growing and growing. I know the owners of Armatura. I'm invited to this next competition like a VIP guest, and I know they've got big plans. So there's many things for East versus West to think about going forwards, because just 6 months ago, Armatura was very small and didn't have these big ambitions, and Georgia versus the World didn't exist. So things are changing very quickly on the arm wrestling scene. So just finally, my position is I want to see, as a fan of the sport, the best versus the best. I don't want to see that get split up, and that's why I throw my weight behind East versus West these last couple months, encouraging the Eastern athletes to get back on board with them. But I would just say overall, we're in challenging times now. A lot of things can happen, and a lot of smart business decisions are going to have to be made. And a lot of this is going to be based on good relations with the athletes. By the way, because the subject comes up so much, I have been told that East versus West now have a middleman or middlewoman. That's not official, but other people have told me they're athletes because they've dealt with that person. So we can wipe my name away from that now. They've got the staff set up how they want. But I think there's choppy waters still to navigate for not only East versus West, but Georgia versus the world, Armatura. But it's clear that there's a lot of organizations with big plans, big ideas. And I believe in the end of all of this, it will come down to two things: money and relationships with athletes. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, guys. I'd be very interested to see what you think of all this. I hope this breakdown has just made you think about this from both sides. It's not clear at all. We don't know factually yet if this is a good thing, a bad thing, or something down the middle, but I'd be very interested to hear your opinions. So thanks for watching, and I'll be back with another video very soon.